This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of NewsWatch, Healing the Divide. I'm Ephraim Graham. Today we're taking a closer look at the political, racial, and religious issues causing unrest and division in our country. And what better place to start than with the history of a man whose life was dedicated to fighting for civil rights for all Americans and healing more than 2 centuries of racial wounds. That man is Martin Luther King Jr.
Love has within it a redemptive power. That is a power there that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemies. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption.
Martin Luther King's message was more than a spirited sermon. It was a belief that defined his leadership and became the crux of the civil rights movement.
This person who was from the American Nazi Party called his name, and when he turned around, he punched him in the face. The guys that were there, they were going to do him in. And Dr. King said, no, brethren, wait a minute, wait, don't harm him. He is the victim by the indoctrination of hate.
Will you press charges against this man?
No, I don't plan to.
He felt that hate cannot overpower hate. Only love can. If you're going to fight hate with hate, you're fighting a losing battle.
Dr. King's example inspired peaceful protests across the country. It also exposed decades of social injustice, bringing blacks and whites together for a common cause.
When America began to see racism, good-hearted people began to say, no, I don't think so. This is not right. This is not good.
I just couldn't understand why this was happening to the African-American community. I just didn't understand it.
Peggy had a unique view of racial prejudice. Her father was Alabama Governor George Wallace, the man who ran his campaign on this promise.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Peggy was 12 when her father, flanked by state troopers, blocked Vivian Malone and James Hood from entering the University of Alabama. The move was in defiance of President John F. Kennedy's executive order to integrate America's schools and colleges.
Do hereby denounce and forbid this illegal and unwarranted action by the central government.
I loved my daddy more than anything in the world. I did not want him to stand in the schoolhouse door, but he did. I just thought it was wrong. I wanted to go up to these people and say, you deserve to be here. You should be here, but I couldn't.
The standoff ended without incident when President Kennedy called in the National Guard. But the next time Governor Wallace tried to intervene, it didn't end so peacefully. On March 7, 1965, 600 men and women started out on foot from Selma, Alabama, to the state capitol in Montgomery to protest voter discrimination. On the far side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met and assaulted by state and local police.
They deserve the right to vote. They were human beings.
The clash, known as Bloody Sunday, left 1 dead and dozens wounded. Wallace, who had ordered law enforcement to Selma, had to answer.
I'm against violence, and I'm just as sorry that anybody got hurt. My orders have always been to use a minimum amount of force.
I would like to think that my father said, do not attack the marchers. That's what I would love to think.
2 weeks later, some 25,000 protesters, led by Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders, made the 47-mile trek from Selma to Montgomery. Within 2 months, President Lyndon B. Johnson had signed the Voting Rights Act into law. But hatred was still alive.
Coming up, Martin Luther King Jr. died a martyr for the cause he spent his life fighting for. But as we'll see, his legacy lives on. Hatred, struggle, and eventually healing came to many associated with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but not until long after that fateful day in 1968 when an assassin's bullet ended his life. That's where we pick up our story of the murdered civil rights leader.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white...
I can't stand to talk about it. That's how hurt I was.
And I remember saying to my dad, "Daddy, I just hate white people. They killed Uncle ML." He says, wait a minute. White people didn't kill your uncle. He says, white people pray with us. White people march with us. White people go to jail with us. White people die with us. The devil killed your uncle. And I remember him saying that we have to love, we have to forgive, we have to love, we have to forgive.
He didn't hate anyone. He saw this as a part of God's plan because he knew that his life might be snuffed out at any time, and he was ready for that. We were determined to give ourselves to helping to fulfill the dream.
Not everyone close to Martin Luther would embrace that dream. His daughter Bernice, who was only 5 when he was murdered, found herself struggling with anger as she entered her teen years.
I remember distinctly in my heart feeling very angry. I was angry at white people because I felt they were responsible. I was angry at black people because I felt like we hadn't done enough to continue his work. I was angry at God because I felt he could have stopped it. My anger did turn to rage and bitterness and hate. I literally ended up hating all white people, especially white men.
But as Bernice dealt with her own pain, Dr. King's message of love and forgiveness would prevail, even in the hearts of those who were once his enemies. While campaigning for presidency in May 1972, George Wallace was shot 4 times at close range by a volunteer. The wounds left him permanently bound to a wheelchair. But that wasn't the only change Peggy saw in her father in the years that followed.
He realized that with his suffering and pain, how much suffering and pain he must have caused the African American community. He'd talk about segregation and he'd talk about how wrong he was. He just wanted forgiveness. One Sunday, he asked his bodyguards, he said, "I want you to take me to Dexter Avenue Church." They took him down there unannounced, and they rolled his wheelchair down that middle aisle, and he sat there and asked that congregation to forgive him. And they did. It filled my heart up. It showed me what love and forgiveness is about. This was a very healing moment for him.
Meanwhile, Bernice's heart was also changing. Ever since her father was killed, her mother, Coretta Scott King, had refused to give in to hatred.
When the Bible says, "Do good to them that hate you, bless them that curse you," I saw her bless those that cursed her, do good to those that hate her. And when she would say, "I don't hold grudges," I watched when people did very painful things to her that she just didn't hold it. She still loved them. It was just a powerful embodiment of Christ's Spirit in our home.
It wasn't until an interview on the James Robison Show in 2000 that her healing finally began.
And in the middle of it, he said, "Can I give you a hug?" Now, internally, I'm like, no. You're a white man? No. My mother taught me better. So I said, sure. And he gave me a hug. It was one of the most genuine hugs I'd ever received. And that sounds probably for most people so simple and trite, but it was very powerful. because it began my healing process.
Another milestone in that healing would come in 2015. On the steps of Alabama's state capitol, Bernice and Peggy stood side by side as thousands gathered to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Being able to join as sister to Peggy Wallace years later, for me, it was like a moment of redemption.
I hugged her and I said, "I love you, Bernice." And she said, "I love you, Peggy." And I thought at that moment about that line that Dr. King spoke about. One day down in Alabama, I hope that white girls and little black girls can hold hands like sisters. And I thought, Dr. King and my father must be up there going, how would we know that it would be our daughters that held hands as sisters down in Alabama?
Much has been accomplished through the work and sacrifices of so many people. And while there's still more to be done, the solution is always the same.
Only love can develop sensitivity in another person's mind and heart.
It will never be legislating morality to such a point that people will do what is right unless you change the heart of the human being. When that heart is genuinely surrendered to God, then we can learn and find what my uncle called the strength to love.
It's who we are and how we live and lead our lives that causes true transformation. Dr. King changed people, not just by his words. He didn't preach stuff that he didn't live. He lived it. We have to learn to hear the truth of God's message and live it and embody it, because that's the light that the world desperately needs right now. It needs the Spirit of Christ. People know the name of Jesus. They don't know his spirit, and we must become his spirit.
It is an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return, is understanding, creative, redemptive goodwill for all men. Theologians would say that it is the love of God operating in the human heart. And when one rises to love on this level, he loves men not because he likes them, but he loves every man because God loves him.
Powerful lessons on a love that comes not from man, but from God. Up next, we're going to see Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech literally lived out in the lives of two men who discover a surprising connection in their family trees. At a time of so much racial division in America, we wanted to bring you a story to inspire. Two ministers from totally different backgrounds show us why the church is uniquely designed to lead the nation toward racial healing. Our Amber Strong brings us the story.
The United States of America, the world's great melting pot. Each person arriving to this country with a unique family history of how their ancestors put an imprint on their lives. Yet with all that diversity, we're often more connected than you might imagine. Matthew Lockett is the great-grandchild of farmers and a pro-life advocate.
He would actually make a joke out of it, my dad, and he would say, I guess we're just a bunch of mutts from Kentucky.
Will Ford is the descendant of slaves. He travels the country sharing a message of racial healing.
They didn't think they would see freedom in their time, so they prayed for the freedom of their children and the next generation.
Two men on two very different journeys. But their worlds collided when they attended a prayer meeting together.
And I show up at the Lincoln Memorial because of this dream. I don't know why I'm there. I didn't really even know that much about prayer, but that was the first place that Will and I came together.
They attended a church service later that night. That's where Ford shared the story of his ancestors' prayer kettle, a pot used by slaves to muffle their voices during secret prayer meetings. That led to a deeper conversation, which resulted in a friendship and an unexpected partnership.
We just started running around the country together and doing prayer meetings.
The Lord said this to me. He said, if I heard the silent whispers of slaves underneath kettle pots, how much more so do I hear the silent screams of babies being aborted in this nation?
Over the next decade, they spread a message of life and love. Love for the man next to you regardless of race, and love for the unborn. But the story doesn't end there. Lockett says there was something about that first meeting he just couldn't shake.
He shared the part of the story that shocked me, that this kettle had been handed down to Harriet Lockett.
Years of research led them to a stunning discovery.
My oldest known family member was a man named Isaac Lockett. The only Locketts at that time period in Virginia was Matt's family. And so after doing 4 months of research then and another whole year of research, we've learned through empirical evidence Matt's family is the family that owned my family.
And that revelation led to some difficult soul searching.
Matt's family owned our family, and I had to wrestle with that because we had stories passed down in our family about slaves who were beat to death for simply going fishing without asking. And I really had to forgive from my heart Matt's family for owning my family.
Lockett says it was a learning experience for him too.
There is many times, particularly with white America, there can be an attitude that, you know, when these issues are discussed and the history of slavery, even the pain, the lingering pain of that to this day, there can be a negative attitude that just kind of dismisses it and says, look, you weren't there, I wasn't there, get over it. There's a very real, lingering pain associated with it generationally. And now that pain had a face, and it was the face that I love.
That discovery could have torn them apart and ended their ministry. Instead, it strengthened their resolve.
God is using a united church to heal a divided nation.
Lockett and Ford say every part of their story, even the tough parts, are by design. They say there are no coincidences, even down to the location of that first meeting.
Sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
It was here almost 55 years ago that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Lockett and Ford believe they are living examples of that dream fulfilled. And that allows them to travel the country together, sharing their dream for the church.
I think what God is shouting to America right now is this: what storyline do you want to be a part of? The healing or the hurt? The blessing and the curse?
Two men from two different backgrounds, sharing a surprising connection and pursuing a common mission of unity, life, and healing. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
When we come back, a blues musician develops an unlikely friendship with a member of the KKK. And welcome back. As we've been showing you today, racial tension still exists in America, but many are working to heal that lingering divide. Our Caitlin Burke brings us the story of one man who is taking on the issue in his own unique way.
Playing music comes as naturally as breathing for 58-year-old blues musician Daryl Davis.
Well, I've been playing music professionally full-time since 1980, when I graduated college at the age of 22.
Through music, Davis has formed some unique friendships.
That's Sam Phillips, the man who discovered Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, the boxer Joe Frazier, Dolly Parton.
And also unlikely ones.
And that was the head of the Maryland Ku Klux Klan.
How did you get to be friends with members of the KKK?
I just happened to be, in 1983, country music had made a resurgence in this country. So I was the only black guy in this country band, and consequently, the only black guy in many of the places where we played.
One place was the Silver Dollar Lounge in Frederick, Maryland. After a performance, a white man stopped Davis as he walked off the stage.
And he says, you know, I really like your all's music. And I said, thank you. I shook his hand, and I don't drink, but I went back to his table and I had a cranberry juice with him. And then he makes the remark, when the waitress brings my cranberry juice, he clinks my glass and cheers me. And he says, you know, this is the first time I ever sat down and had a drink with a black man. Well, now I'm thinking, wow, you know, what's going on here? You know, this guy's really having a night of firsts. And I said, why? And again, I was naive, and I wasn't trying to be facetious. And I said, well, why is that? He stared at the tabletop and didn't answer me. And he had a friend sitting next to him. He goes, tell him, tell him, tell him. I said, tell me. And finally he says, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Since age 10, when first confronted with the realities of racism, Davis pondered one question: how can you hate me when you don't know me? His unlikely KKK connection inspired him to start getting answers.
Some years later, I decided I was going to write a book on the Klan.
His research often put him in some dangerous situations, but it also led to an unexpected change in the relationship he shared with certain Klan members.
I would ask them questions, and they would answer the questions, but they wouldn't ask for my opinion. And then over time, I would say, so what do you think about blah, blah, blah? And they would say, well, I think da, 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 da. And then they would say, well, what do you think about it, Daryl? Oh, wait a minute. All of a sudden I have value?
Davis says he's convinced 25 members of the Ku Klux Klan to leave the organization simply through friendly conversation.
And when they did so, they gave me their robes and hoods. That's just not done. This uniform represents white supremacy. And you're taking it off and giving it to a black man?
As a new generation of African Americans enter adulthood, they're fighting racism their own way. Rather than trying to change one mind at a time, as Davis has done, this activist generation is using social media to reach the masses.
Some in the Black Lives Matter movement have been critical of Davis, saying he's defeating their purpose with his relational approach.
The fact that I would sit down and spend so much time with the enemy when I should be devoting my time to changing the system of white supremacy.
Davis believes this younger generation has the right intent, although their methods can taint the mission.
You need a multi-pronged attack from the front, from the side, from the back, through the rear window, whatever. You don't change the system without changing the people behind the system. Okay? That's why I'm sitting down with them. And I've had success.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Baltimore, Maryland.
And that concludes this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can always find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today on this special edition. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as Instagram. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.